Hey everybody, welcome back to American History with Mr. Finn. Today we are going to look at the post-Civil War world in the United States of America, and that period is known as Reconstruction, which makes sense. We were trying to reconstruct our country. So for a definition, because this will be a question on quizzes for sure, this is the time period following the Civil War. So that entire time period after the Civil War is called the period of Reconstruction. We'll talk about when this period ends when we get to it, but it's going to start at the end of the Civil War. And here's the question, as we started last class, how do you bring the country together after you just went to war? And at the end of the war, if you remember, we had Grant chasing Lee, Sherman burning down basically Georgia. It was really ugly, this type of fighting, as we got down towards the end with the total war. So what does this period look like? Well, one of the big things that is important is this Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau is going to be a very, like I said, important group. It's a government agency. Let me give you a definition for it. Freedmen's Bureau is a government agency. Really, that's designed to help newly freed men, so former slaves. Government agency that helps, we'll say, former slaves. You know, freedmen, they were freed. And during this period of Reconstruction, this government agency is important because in the South, think about this, slaves were slaves, and now they were freed men. What does that mean? Like, I don't change, nothing about me changed. I was a slave here, now I'm free, except for now that I'm free, where do I live? What do I do? What's my job? How do I, where's my family? That's the first question. After the Civil War, the first thing that Reconstruction allows are for former slaves to go and find family members. Because you got to think about this. The slave market itself was, you were brought to a place and you were bought as a person, like as a slave. You were bought, you were purchased, and I would have to go with that family to that plantation. But my wife might be taken to that one, what if my wife was with the children and I'm over here? Like, slavery is terrible on every, no matter what angle you look at it, it's terrible. But that's a specifically bad one as well, splitting up families. So this time period is going to be a lot about like, hey, where's my family? But then again, what do I do? What's my job? How do I make a living? Where do I live? What's everything? I am just now a human being, free. And I'm happy that I'm free. I would give anything for my freedom. But what do I do now? And that's the question. So this government agency, the Freedmen's Bureau, is going to help these former slaves in a number of different ways. The Freedmen's Bureau, just to give some kind of ideas, a big one is going to be education. So building schools, getting kids in schools, churches, education, churches. Really, those are the big things at first. Jobs, like, what can your profession be? Employment. Because think about it, slaves they weren't taught how to read and write and do all these things. So it wasn't as if, like, it was you or I who was a slave, and then now I'm free, and I'm like, well, hey, I can apply for jobs now and things like that. Slaves had been purposefully kept, uneducated, because if they had education, slave owners would be like, hey, they can think for themselves. They might get dangerous and try and have an uprising, stuff like that. We want to keep them uneducated. That's what we want to keep them. So now they're free, and it's like, well, we have a whole ton of uneducated people. So what's one of the first things we got to do? We got to teach you how to read and write and get you all these skills. And again, churches were a big thing for community of these African Americans, and obviously employment and jobs. So this Freedmen's Bureau is a huge boost for these former slaves. during this period of Reconstruction. Now, let's get to Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is the president after Lincoln. He is the president after Lincoln. And here is the problem with Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is way too easy. Way too easy on the South. And really Southerners and Southern leaders and people who led the states to secede from the Union. Andrew Johnson's way too soft. So basically here's the idea. Let me give you a little bit of a rundown. If Andrew Johnson's over here and he's way too easy, we'll have a line here. In the middle of this would have been Lincoln. Lincoln was what we would call, or use the term, moderate, or in the middle. He had some ideas. He didn't want to punish the South, but he wanted to make sure that the South followed the new laws and the freeing the slaves and all of those things. He wanted to keep them honest, but he didn't want to punish them. He's way too easy. He's just like, hey, come on back in. You just swear an oath of allegiance to America, and you're back in. The problem is there's another group. The other group on the other side is this group. Radical Republicans. Remember, Lincoln was a Republican. Radical Republicans, they do want to punish the South. All right? So Lincoln was able to kind of stem them off. He was like, listen, I hear you. You want to punish the South. You want to make it hard on them. You want to, drag them through the mud. It's their fault. They dragged us into this conflict. Americans have died. We must punish them so they understand how serious we are. And Lincoln's like, yeah, I know. But we don't want, I hear you, but I don't want to go, punishing them because we're trying to bring the country back together. Remember, Lincoln was all about the Union. Let's bring the Union back together. So Lincoln was like, yeah, I agree. We need to do this, and this, but we can't be as harsh. We can't punish them like as badly as you want to. But then what happened to Lincoln? Lincoln's not there anymore. So we lose our middle ground, and now all we have is this guy saying, come on back in, yeah, oath of allegiance to the country, and you're back. And then we have these guys who want to punish the Republicans. So you have these two massive groups. They are not going to see eye to eye, obviously. In fact, the Radical Republicans hate Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson vetoes a bill that was sent to him, meaning like the Congress wanted to send a voting rights, make a voting rights law that said like, hey, got to protect the voting rights for all people, and especially African Americans now in the South. We need to pass this law. And Andrew Johnson vetoed it. Meaning he was like, nope, not going to sign it, not going to allow it to go in. Leading people to be like, wait, Andrew Johnson, are you, do you support the South? Why would you not sign a voting rights bill to make it a law that protects everyone's right to vote? Do you not want these newly freed people to vote? Like, why would you veto that? So then the Radical Republicans veto his veto, and it turns into a mess. In fact, Andrew Johnson this is a fun word for us, they impeach Andrew Johnson. Meaning they convict him, or they not convict him, they accuse him of wrongdoing. When you are impeached, we just had an impeachment. Actually, we just had the first a president who was impeached twice. That has not happened before. Impeached means that there is, concern that you have done something wrong, and then it goes to a vote. And if you are voted to be removed from office, you can be removed from office. To this point, no one has been removed from office, but we've had a few presidents be impeached, meaning Congress did not like the way or the House did not like what they were doing or thought something was wrong. They impeach that president. It goes to the Senate, and they vote to see if they would remove that president. That's how bad it gets. So it happened a few times in all of American history, and Andrew Johnson is one of those presidents who does get impeached because they're saying, because they're on such different sides of the coin here. So he is impeached. They're taking his power away, basically. They get enough. Andrew Johnson's so bad that the radical Republicans are going to get a lot of seats in Congress in the next election cycle, which brings us over to this. So we know the radical Republicans want to do this. They impeach Andrew Johnson. They get power, and they pass the Military Reconstruction Act of, Act is usually capitalized, Act of 1867. Now, what is this? Well, this divides the South into, you guessed it, military districts. So what does that mean? Basically, the South is going to be divided up into different districts. There is going to be military personnel who rule over the South. It's a pretty extreme measure if you think about it. You would see United States military, militarily occupying your town, area, whatever. You would belong to one of these districts, and you would be living there. And you would hate this because the South is like, wait a second, this isn't cool. But Andrew Johnson had been doing things like giving pardons to the South, and then the people in the South would enact things called black codes, which would be like basically laws that had stopped these African Americans from like doing anything, basically. And the North and these radical Republicans are like, Andrew Johnson, like, it's going back to the way it was. We can't have that. This is how we're going to stop it. We're going to send our military to the South. They're going to watch what's going on. They're going to ensure that the Freedmen's Bureau is able to do these things. We're going to get these newly freedmen education. We're going to build them churches. We're going to get them employment. We're going to do this stuff. We're going to change. We're going to make sure that the South cannot go back to the way it was before the war. And this is how we're going to do it. And so, as we sit here, a couple years after the end of the war, the South is now under military occupation by the North, even though we are one country now. The North is making sure that the South sticks to the things that the ideas of, freeing the slaves, equal opportunities, equal rights, equal voting, all this stuff. And they feel that this is the only way they can do it, is dividing up the South into military districts and occupying the South. Southerners hate it. Northerners feel like it's the only way they can ensure that this stuff happens. And that's kind of where we're at in 1867. Next class, we're going to look at what's going on in the South as this is taking place, and how is this period of Reconstruction, this time period after the Civil War, going to come to an end. And that's what we'll get at next class. So get these notes. We'll probably have a quiz next class as well. Get these notes into me today for participation and attendance purposes, and I will see you next class.